Hey folks, welcome to the Knifeprint Master Class Series Episode 8. This will be the last video in this series, so I appreciate you hanging in with me and checking them all out. Today we're going to be making probably one of the most complicated builds we've done in the whole series. We're going to be making a slip joint folder. So stay tuned, we're going to get right into it. Before that, I want to mention that all of the designs you've seen me do in this series are available to my Patreon members. If you're curious about that, there's a link down in the video description. If you're not a Patreon member and don't want to become a Patreon member, you can also buy sets of those designs on my website, also linked down in the description, so go take a look at those. Definitely stay tuned. Let's get right into this folder design.
Okay, we're ready to go in and design our folder. This is going to be a slip joint. If you're not familiar with the different kinds of folders, a slip joint is the kind of folder where just pressure from your hand will open it. It doesn't have a lock or anything, but it has a spring that will hold it open and it will kind of lock it closed, but you don't need to unlock it. You'll understand a little more when we get into it. So let's start from scratch and we'll get into our design. So there's really three parts to a slip joint. We're going to do the blade, we're going to do the spring, and then we'll do the frame. What's going to cover the blade when it's closed. There's going to be a lot of little tweaky things, a lot of moving things around, and a lot of little trial and error on this. It is a complicated build, and everything in this has to fit together perfectly. So bear with me, folks. This might be a long design. So we're going to start with my typical kind of knife shape. I'm going to do a false edge. Okay, then we're going to have kind of the blade. And really the important part of a slip joint is these notches at the around the blade, and I will explain these as we do them. Okay, so let's fix up our knife a little bit, make it look a little more presentable. Whoops. All right, something like that for the blade. Then we get into the kind of the notches of where you're going to see how you're going to see this come together. There's going to be kind of a round part. This is the part that's going to move against the spring. More about this soon. Trying to make this very even here. It's close. Okay, and then I want this angle to match this angle, and you'll see why in a little bit. And then there's going to be a stop pin so that when you close it, the blade doesn't smash into the inside of the frame, because that would kind of ruin our knife. So we're going to put a stop pin. It's kind of going to be what it looks like. And we're going to test this out. That's being able to test and close your folding knife is one of the key parts of this design. Because doing this by hand, because I've done it by hand, you end up cutting these out in pieces of cardboard and nailing them to a piece of wood so you can turn them and flip them. It's very, very tedious, and it takes a really long time. This is much easier. So our actual pivot will draw here. It's going to be a 1/4 inch. Okay, and then we'll center up our pin. Our pivot. All right, let's check our blade length. Okay, it's way too big. So let's shorten this quite a bit. I want it about 4.5 inches, 4 inches, something like that. So we're at, okay, 5 inches. We'll live with that. So that's kind of what our blade's going to look like. Let's just put a bevel here for our false edge. Okay, so there's our blade. It's good enough for now. Now let's start on our pivot mechanism. So we're going to be drawing a spring. So I want to actually make some room for my spring. So let's move this over here. And we're going to add a new layer. We will call it spring. So really the spring for these is just another piece of metal. It looks like it's part of the frame. The spring will be something like this. It'll have a kind of a flat part, and then the spring mechanism is going to go to about here, and then something like that. This narrow part of the spring is what's going to be flexible and allow this part to actually move. So this is our spring portion, and this part will just be kind of bolted into the frame so that in 3 places so it doesn't move, and the only part of the knife that moves is going to be this. So it'll pivot around a frame, which we'll draw in later. So the very first thing we need to do is see how our pivot is going to work and see if our knife is going to fit into our frame. So we're going to go back to the knife because I want the blade to pivot. So I'm going to go to our pivot function. You can see it automatically put the pivot in the center, but I want to move it to, obviously, the center, of where our pivot hole is. Now I can close our knife. So I can see a couple of issues. When it's closed, it's kind of hitting this part of the spring. So we're going to have to fix that. Okay, also, I see this is not really hitting. So where this pivot is got to move. It's got to move back. So we're going to move it to about here. And you'll see what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to open this, go to our spring, and then move our spring, pivot, the spring, so it slips into that area. Now let's go back and check our pivot. Okay. So you'll notice how when the blade starts to close, this round part is going to push this part of the spring up. So you're going to get a little bit of resistance to close it. That's what we want. A little bit of resistance to close it. And then as it gets close to the end, there'll be less resistance, and that'll want it to slide in. Okay, the problem is we're nowhere near this pivot. So we really need to do some work here on the placement of this spring. So we need to really move this placement quite a bit. And a lot of this is some kind of trial and error. Whoops. Okay, so our spring is quite a bit off. So let's work on our spring a little bit more. This should move so that it's about here. Yeah, so this, there's a bunch of issues here. Okay, where the blade is, this part of the pivot has to be at the same level as the blade. So we've really not got this in the right spot. So we're going to move this whole thing up so that it's about here. Okay, so now we can go back to our spring. Again, you can see there's a lot of trial and error here. Yeah, so I'm going to move our spring back up. And now these. All right, let's try our pivot again. We'll recenter it. Close it. Okay. All right, so now we got some other issues. Yeah, so I can see one of the issues we have is that our pivot really just isn't in the right place. Now, you'll see now we're going to, okay, it's much closer there. Very close. And then popping that. All right. So let's move our knife, the whole thing. We're going to move the knife just this layer down. Okay, and you notice I'm just working on the pivot mechanism to make sure that the pivot is correct from the closed position to the open position. Okay, so now I know I'm getting pretty close. So now I'm going to move where my spring is in this position. Okay, we'll go back to our pivot. All right, let's fix this. All right, we're getting close. Now, if we use our pivot, this angle is going to, as I go down, it's going to push this part of the spring up. And as I come around, we're going to fix that later, then it's going to pop that spring into place here. So a couple of things we need to fix. This part here is a little too big. So we're just going to move this in. So now let's go back. So it's not pushing the spring up as much, and then it'll just pop in there. Again, this spring is going to be moving up and down here, but this will push it up. Okay, it's a little too aggressive. Let's just shorten this here. All right, we'll do a few more little adjustments. I think we're getting really close on our spring. Okay, let's pivot it one more time just to make sure. So we're going to close it. We're just going to push the spring up, and then it'll lock down and slide down into that position. All right. I think we got our spring pretty close. So now let's fix our blade up a little bit. We're going to just trim it down to the spring. Okay. Let's check our pivot now. Okay, so we got to fix this a little bit because it's got to be about the right height. Okay. I mean, I could spend a little more time on this. I'm not going to. You get the idea, but you could play with this quite a bit more. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to get going with this. All right, so we've got our pivot mechanism. Let's fix our blade up a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, that looks pretty good for the blade. Except these are a little wonky. Okay, so there's our blade. Let's close it again. Oh, okay, so there it is in the closed position. So now we can start working on the rest of our spring. Okay, this fits well. These, whoops, not really in the best position. Let's add some curves here. All right, so we've got our blade. All right, so there's our spring. What's going to hold our spring is a couple of pins that we're going to put over here. So let's draw some holes. Okay. And we'll make these 1 inch or 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so we can put a pin hole there. We'll copy, paste, paste. Okay. And these would just basically get screwed into the frame. Now we also need a stop pin. So I'm also going to paste a 1/8 inch stop pin right here. So that when the blade closes, let's make this match here. Okay, so it's going to look something like that. Oh, I see we made this just a little too narrow. All right, let's make sure our pivot works. Oops. So we'll open. There's the lock. Oh, okay, we move something. And then pivot to closed. Yeah, so the one issue. Yeah, so let's move this down. Pivot. Okay, so let's check where we're at. We've got it locking into position. Okay, the pivot point, it hits the pivot. The pin here, I'm going to just move this pin down just a little bit. There. Okay, and this pin is going to go through the frame. Let's fix this up. All right. So now let's draw the actual frame that this is going to go into. So we'll add another one. We're going to call this frame. Okay, and now the frame is really easy. The frame is really going to match a lot of what we see already here. So it's going to really, I'll fix that after. There. So now I'm going to make the frame fit everything. So this. And it doesn't have to be precise, for our first drawing. Another way to do this would be to start with your knife and just copy it. Would probably be easier, but we'll do it this way. So I need a notch so that you can actually grab this with your fingers. Okay, so this is where your finger, your hand is going to be able to grab the blade so you can pull it out. Let's move this over. And now just the rest of our frame here. Okay, so I see that our spring goes out a little too far. So I don't really want that, so I'm going to select this part of the spring and just shorten it a bit. And now back to our frame. Now we can match this. All right, so that's pretty close. Let's just recap where we're at. Okay, so there's our knife. Let's see what this looks like when it opens. So let's zoom out a little bit. Okay, we're going to go back to our blade, put the pivot on. And sometimes it's easier if you kind of zoom in here and then zoom out so you can set your pivot point really accurately. Now we can open our blade. Okay, not bad. There's a couple of things I don't like right now. Okay, I can see that here, there's kind of a pointy part here. So let's fix that. Probably move that here. Just so that it's just a little, we want all the mechanism covered. Let's go back to our pivot. Whoops, our pivot here. Close it. And stops at our stop pin. Okay, but now it doesn't cover here quite a bit. So now we got to go back here and just make this just a wee bit bigger. Just so that all the mechanism is covered. Something like that. So now we can grab the blade. Okay, grab the blade, pull it out, lock it into place. Okay, which is right there. Okay, our frame is still covering all the mechanism here. We see a little, this area. We could tweak this and move this pin if we wanted to, we can move this pin a little closer. Let's do that. So let's move the whole pin assembly this way. Okay, let's make sure it opens. Okay, so there's pin. All right. We could even make the front of our handle here. If we wanted to cover this, we could, but it's kind of like a sharpening notch, so I don't mind where it is. We could even actually, I'm getting to be a bit of a perfectionist here, but now I'm going to just move this again. So it's up a little higher, and I'm going to make this a little smaller. So when it's closed, there. Okay, I think that's a lot better, because now when it's opened, that's really just a little sharpening notch. We can actually put our bevel of our knife, which we haven't done. Let's do that. Say we wanted it here. Say we wanted it like that. So now this doubles as a sharpening notch and where our stop pin is going to go. Let's close our knife. Hits the stop pin, is within the frame. Everything looks great. All right. And then, of course, if we wanted to, we could use the mill, cut a little finger groove here, so your fingernail could actually pull this out. So quite a bit of tedious work here on this design of doing a folding knife like this. The pivot tool is critical. So the pivot tool, making sure that this is going to fit into the knife on both sides in this way, because this spring is critical to making this work, and it has to slip, hence slip joint, slip into those notches. Hopefully this was useful, folks. I know it was kind of tedious to get through all this, but you can see the importance of some of the features here. This would have taken 5 times longer doing it by hand. Thanks, folks. Thanks for joining me on the Knifeprint Master Class Series. This is the end of the series. I appreciate you watching. Thank you very much. We'll see you in future videos.